They want justice for those who were murdered and who were buried at Gilgo Beach. There can be no healing without justice.
Today, prosecutors announced a seventh murder victim in the Gilgo Beach serial killer case.
A New York architect already accused in the murder of 6 women has just been charged in the death of a 7th. Rex Heuermann was in court this morning as prosecutors announced this latest charge against him. Heuermann is the alleged Gilgo Beach serial killer charged in a long list of deaths dating back more than 3 decades.
Valerie Mack's remains were found 24 years ago. She had been working as an escort in Philadelphia and was last seen in the year 2000. The same year she disappeared in New Jersey. The Gilgo 4 is now up to almost double that number. Valerie Mack now makes 7 potential victims tied to the Long Island serial killer suspect, Rex Heuermann.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Those of you who know me know I've actually visited Heuermann's home in Long Island, Massapequa Park. Also, I've retraced the commute he did from home to his office. I've stood in front of his office in Midtown Manhattan. I've had a look at that trash can that's right in front of the office where they recovered the piece of pizza that he discarded and, importantly, the DNA that was found on it. But the question is, why did it take so long to make the connection with Valerie Mack, and what was the evidence that connected her to him? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you find this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started.
Valerie Mack, a 24-year-old mother, brutally murdered back in the year 2000.
The evidence is we have mitochondrial DNA from a hair that was found on the body of Valerie Mack.
Well, the longest story is that a hunter's dog discovered Mack's decapitated body in a wooded area of Manorville on Long Island. Those words need to be underlined because it's quite important to remember these details, right? A hunter's dog discovered Mack's decapitated body in a wooded area of Manorville on Long Island on November 19, 2000. Long Island is a very wooded environment. When you drive through there are just trees all over the place. Her remains were bound with rope inside a black plastic bag. That's also important, bound with rope, which was wrapped with duct tape according to a bail application that accompanied the new indictment. Remember the rope because we're going to come back to it. Now remember, Heuermann himself was a hunter, and just 6 months ago this year, in June, 2 more victims were added to Heuermann's alleged tally, including Jessica Taylor. So just think about it. Earlier this year, there were 4 victims. Then another 2 were added, 6, and now another 1, that's 7. So 3 more victims just in the last 6 months. According to Fox 5, some of Taylor's remains were found in a wooded area in Manorville. Does that ring a bell? Taylor was found decapitated. Does that ring a bell? With her arms severed from her body. That was around July 26, 2003. Police also said a tattoo on her body had been severely obliterated by a sharp object. So what we're seeing here is a pattern of trying to destroy and fragment the body, the remains, in order to prevent those remains from being identified. A lot of effort going into the destruction of these remains. And that already tells you something about how careful the perpetrator is. And for all intents and purposes, the killer did succeed in doing that, in preventing these various remains from being identified, going on for a decade and even longer. Now, I know we're dealing with the victim Valerie Mack, but I just want to touch again on Taylor's remains. They were located in March 2011 along Ocean Parkway, near those of another sex worker, 24-year-old Valerie Mack. So it's important that you see these remains, these sets of remains, in context to one another. The fact that they're in the same fabric is really important. Now look at the pattern. decapitations, some remains dumped in the same wooded area used by hunters, and again bear in mind that Heuermann himself was a hunter, while others are dumped along the same stretch of Gilgo Beach. And then overlay that timeline with a pattern of Heuermann's wife and children going out of state. Incidentally, the earliest victim that cops think Heuermann's murdered, at least so far, is from November 1993, Sandra Costilla. So what evidence connected this seventh victim so far to the suspect? Well, you heard some of that, but according to ABC News, the prosecutors said that they linked Heuermann to Mack's death in part through mitochondrial DNA analysis of a female hair. So they didn't find his hair on the victim, right? They found a female's hair on the victim, and it matched the profile of Heuermann's wife and daughter. And that is according to the bail application. At the time of Mack's murder, Heuermann's daughter would have been between 3 and 4 years old. That's incredibly scary, if you ask me. Imagine that you're a little girl, and the daddy of this 3 or 4 year old little girl is moonlighting as a particularly vicious killer, preying exclusively on young women. It's also incredible how advanced DNA testing is in modern forensics. It's really incredible how that technology has come online in a way. Now, let me ask you a question. Would you say the Rex Heuermann case is a DNA case? Now, we're going a little bit off track here, but proponents of the intruder theory who follow the Ramsey case, and just ignoramuses in general, have somehow arrived at the conclusion that you can throw away all the evidence in the Ramsey case, and the entire case now boils down to a single unknown DNA profile. So, is that the same in this case? Is this a DNA case? Is any case a DNA case? Because there's also a second area that allegedly connects Heuermann to this victim. Any idea what that is? Digital breadcrumbs. So prosecutors, according to one report, said they also linked Heuermann to Mack's death through evidence recovered on some of the, get this, 350 electronic devices that they seized from him that include, quote, a significant collection of violent bondage and torture porn dating back to at least 1994. So you can see how this choice to indulge in this kind of activity has driven his psychology, the killer's psychology, in a very real way. In terms of the report, this online collection included images of mutilation and tying up women with ropes, two things prosecutors said are consistent with injuries inflicted on Mack and how she was bound, according to officials. So what we have is a psychological match, potentially. The pornography reveals an unusual fixation with control. We should say it's an unusual kind of pornography, right? The instruments of control and subjugation are ropes. And so there's a clear sadistic motive here. Serial killers are always sadists, and in this case, it's in the sense of torture being part and parcel of the motive as well. This was one aspect I felt was missing from Richard Allen's case. No evidence of pornography in the Delphi murders, right? And that doesn't mean there wasn't any, but I would have expected there to be some, perhaps milder than Heuermann's extreme taste, but some nonetheless. Also, if the authorities literally found zero pornography on Allen's devices, that in itself would be strange, in the way that the absence of evidence is also evidence. There's also a third area, also within Heuermann's digital archive, relating to a planning document that police feel connects him to this particular victim. According to the article from ABC News, investigators said they found one document they believe Heuermann used to plan out his kills. The document was created in 2000. That's pretty important. The same year Mack was killed. Under a section named Supplies, Heuermann allegedly listed rope and cord, saw, cutting tools, and foam drain cleaner. Pretty scary stuff. Under a section labeled DS, believed to stand for dump site, Heuermann allegedly listed one of the locations where Mack's remains were found. Officials said so, possibly the Manorville Woods. The document also included a body prep section with a note to remove heads and hands, according to the bail application. So he's actually written, apparently, a blueprint that he can stick to, like a planning document for murder.
Yeah, this was wild. We did not expect it, and it doesn't sound like his defense attorney expected him to say anything either. It was an unsolicited comment where he said to the judge while handcuffed behind his back, "Your Honor, I am not guilty of these charges," to which we heard a very packed courtroom. A lot of victims' family members in that courtroom kind of gave out a gasp, and kind of a gasp of disbelief, I would call it.
Do you believe him? Do you think his family believe him? Now, according to the same article, Heuermann allegedly kept newspaper and magazine clippings about the Gilgo Beach serial killings in his Massapequa Park home. As I say, I've actually walked past there, visited the area, and they go on to say that Rex Heuermann sought, purchased, and kept these publications as souvenirs or mementos of his crimes. You kind of get the sense that there was a sense of pride associated with this quote-unquote recognition. Heuermann is, to me, a classic case, and bear in mind he's just a suspect at this point, innocent until proven guilty, but he appears to fit the classic profile of the anal sadistic killer. And how do you recognize an anal sadistic killer? Well, the more extreme the sadism, the more extreme the anality. What is anality? It's, well, the non-living focus on details, on analyzing everything, on the non-living things like porn. The equation also works in the opposite direction. Find someone who is extremely anal, extremely meticulous about everything, extremely detailed orientated, an extreme perfectionist, and you found someone capable of extreme sadism. It's basically a fixation of non-living things that leads to a hatred of living things, and then it's sort of acted out. And so ordinary people also need to be careful of becoming anal. Heuermann, in terms of just his job as an architect, he's like a rule enforcer. He's not a typical architect. He's in Manhattan. Just think about that towering landscape. But instead of designing dreams and these incredible towers in this epic landscape, he's grubbing around the small print that ties them down. And this seems to be the perfect match for the extreme violence we see perpetrated on the poor victims in this case. That there's a lot of frustration underlying that aggression. And so one wonders now, when will this case finally be headed to trial? Thank you for listening. Look out for the next video in the John Benet Ramsey case. We'll be putting up part 2. It'll be coming up in an hour or two. Look out for that. Thank you for listening. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you guys next time.